Jake Chapman, really excited to have you on the All Together show where you get to do you. Thanks for being here, buddy.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, so just to let the audience know, quick rundown. I meant you went to Berkeley, undergrad and law school. You went to work at a law firm. You were general counsel. You made your way. I don't know that it's planned. Maybe it just happens. Maybe it just evolves in an organic fashion into kind of an incubator role, and then directly into investing. And you're now the one of the partners at Alpha Bridge Ventures. All of that's kind of interesting. But if I say to you, who is Jake Chapman, or if you roll back the clock and you're
Welcome to the All Together Show with Eric Satz. On this show, you'll hear Eric's unfiltered interviews with interesting and untraditional entrepreneurs who ignored boundaries, followed their instincts and own paths, and are now empowering others to do the same. Subscribe to the show and learn more by visiting alltogether.show. And now, your host, Eric Satz.
My final guest of season 1 of the All Together show is Jake Chapman, co-founder and managing partner at Alpha Bridge Ventures. If you read his bio on the Alpha Bridge website, it says, Jake is a technology optimist and believes that while not perfect, technology holds the key to solving the greatest challenges faced by humankind, and in so doing, will generate great wealth.
I'm an investor today,
if I read that first line about most people, I would be incredibly skeptical. But when I think about intellectual horsepower, the first person who comes to mind for me is Jake. The other thing that separates Alpha Bridge from other VCs I've met in the past is their belief that the success of the companies they invest in is wholly dependent on the health, happiness, and resiliency of their founders. And they've made a commitment to that through their partnership with Project Atlas. Enough of me talking about Jake. I'm going to let you listen to my talk with Jake. I hope you enjoy it as much as I did.
This episode of the All Together Show is brought to you by Alto IRA. Alto is a digital, self-directed IRA company modernizing IRA investing. They make it easy and cost-effective for individual investors to access their retirement savings and invest in alternative assets. To learn more, visit altoira.com.
Totally crazy. But I think that we're maybe the first generation that has an outside chance at immortality, right? Like humans have chased immortality as long as humans have had science, before science, right? When people were like doing haruspicy and magic in caves. But I think that there is an outside chance that we could actually discover immortality in the next, say, 40 or 50 years. Could be digital immortality, right? Some sort of upload, and then we can debate whether or not that actually is immortality, and is there a soul, and what does it mean? Could you be conscious and live in a machine? But also potentially biologic immortality, right? Like aging, you're born knowing that you're going to die someday, and aging seems like an immutable characteristic of life, right? But really, it's just a combination of a bunch of biological processes and diseases and things that add up over time. And they're all really tricky and really complicated, but they're not inherently unsolvable. So that's like the first part, right? Like, I think it's actually possible to live forever. Debate whether or not that's a good thing. I'm sure some people don't want to live forever. But if you can live forever and you're just an insatiably curious person, then at some point you have to travel to stars, right? You have to see what it's like to live in other places in the galaxy or see other things. And so, yeah, that's on the bucket list. I don't know if I'll get there, but you've got to have stretch goals.
If you live long enough, you will.
That's right. Yeah.
So, God, I'm so glad you are on the show. I knew it would go something like this, which is to say, I had no idea where it was going to go. And if you think of the body as a machine, right, and the machine is aging, sure, I guess you could replace the parts. I mean, I have a fake hip, right? And I'm 51 years old, but wouldn't you have to replace? So it seems to me that we're in a place with medicine today, bones, joints, relatively speaking, easy. Maybe even some organs, not easy, but doable.
Yeah.
How do you see a future for the same for the rest of the system?
Well, I mean, I don't remember what the exact stats are, right? But we've all heard that, your skin cells are fully replaced every 30 days or something, and yada yada yada. And so, like, the you that I'm talking with right now, like, you are made of different material than the you that I met, 3 years ago. And like, I'm sure there's some continuity in like neurons and stuff, but we're all fully replaced anyway with biologic material over time by our bodies. That material just degrades over time. It's not as good as it once was, and there are other things that sort of build up, right? But like, you could theoretically, you don't have to have a fake hip that's made out of titanium or whatever they make fake hips out of these days. Like, maybe it's made out of your own bone material, right? It's just sort of regrown. So yeah, I don't know.
I vote for the titanium, by the way. It's doing really, really well. So,
well,
but let's
talk
go
about, like, if we conquer aging, right, and you can effectively live forever, that means that we have mastered human biology to like such a degree that then we can start talking about, like, do you make people better than people, like naturally born people? And then we can have like the ethical debates about, like, well, clearly if we develop that technology, it's going to end up going to the wealthy first, and so then you have like this enormous divide between rich and poor, and of course that's going to affect not just class but also race and all sorts of other things. So like, it really like opens up Pandora's box.
It does, including at what point are you no longer you?
Right.
So, but let's go back to the beginning before your skin cells started, altering. Where and when were you born?
So I was born in Southern California. And I grew up in like the San Dimas Laverne area. So most people, their only touch point with San Dimas is San Dimas High School, because that is where Bill and Ted went to high school. And
oh, excellent.
Yeah. Party on. That's a different movie. Yeah, or it's also where Raging Waters is. So if you grew up in Southern California in the 90s, like I did, then you would always see ads on TV advertising Raging Waters, which is like, just a water theme park, which is where the 10 and the 210 freeways meet. Like, I can remember those commercials like they were yesterday.
And you grew up as an only child, is that right?
Yep, only child.
And what did your parents do?
Yeah, so my dad was sort of a jack of all trades, handyman kind of guy. And he actually worked for my stepdad, who ran a fire sprinkler contracting business. And his claim to fame, or like the bulk of the work he did when I was growing up, was at Universal Studios. And so they had him design a fire sprinkler system that could also be used to make fake rain. So in a bunch of movies that were filmed in the back lot of Universal Studios, if it's raining, it is probably the system that he designed and installed.
Okay. And
you could ask about my dad working for my stepdad, which is a really interesting.
Well, I was about to, and then I pivoted, but I'm going to come back to it. So yeah, okay. Tell us about your dad working for your stepdad.
So my mom and my dad got divorced when I was 2. And my mom and my stepdad got together, I think, when I was like 5, so quite young. So I view my stepdad and my dad, both who have unfortunately passed. They were really both my dads growing up, and they had a pretty good relationship. I mean, every once in a while they fight, right? Like, everybody does. But they actually, all 3 of them got along pretty well. So I had a somewhat unique childhood and was pretty lucky that they were all able to, get along.
That's really cool. And so your dad, it sort of sounds like he was an inventor, a tinkerer. Is it? I mean, is that also a a characteristic trait, or am I making that up? Am I pulling it out?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say an inventor, but a tinkerer for sure. I mean, he grew up in the 60s and 70s, went to Vietnam. Dad, had the big garage where like the full suite of tools, and so my dad had the same thing. Had the drill press in the garage and all the power tools you could possibly want. When he was a kid, built a lot of cars, worked on cars his whole life. So I wouldn't say an inventor, but definitely, someone who was good with their hands and, could do the home improvement projects that, I would never dream of taking on myself. I can,
oh,
if the
really?
toilet is running and won't stop, I can take the back of the toilet off and I can fix that problem. That's like the extent.
But that is a really important one, I have to say.
Yeah.
I mean, when the toilet's running, it just bums everybody out. So when you can solve that, that's a big win, I think. So you grew up in Southern California. What's high school like for you?
Oh, it was miserable.
Yeah, explain.
So I went to I had kind of an interesting school experience too. So I went to when I was young, like first, second, third grade, I went to a Hebrew academy. So half my family is Jewish. And then I went to a fire and brimstone Protestant school that was like of the sort of born again variety where I was definitely going to hell. And then I went to an all boys Catholic high school, Jesuit high school with Irish Catholic priests. High school wasn't miserable because of the school. The school was actually pretty good, but I was like super overweight. I was a huge nerd. Didn't have a ton of friends. I mean, I had like a tight knit group of friends, but we were all like sort of that like unpopular group. We were all the high school debaters.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so, this feels like a John Hughes movie almost.
Yeah, a little bit. Without like the without like the nerdy girl who's actually like really beautiful,
Okay. So, why Berkeley? How do you decide on Berkeley?
Good question. Well, the only schools I applied to were in California. I applied to Stanford early admission. They rejected me. Didn't get to go to.
Their loss.
Yeah, their loss. And then I applied to like a whole host of UCs. I didn't get into UCLA or UC San Diego. All of my friends got into UCLA, so they all went to UCLA together. The only UCs I got into were UC Riverside and UC Berkeley. And UC Berkeley accepted me as a spring admit. So I was like good enough to get in, but like not good enough to be like a regular person who was admitted. I was like, well, I don't want to go to Riverside, and like Berkeley is supposed to be the best of the UC schools, and I want to go to Bolt. Like I knew like I wanted to go to law school, or I thought I wanted to go to law school. And I was actually really happy to go to a school where I wasn't going to know anybody. Like a big school, I wasn't going to know anybody. Like I wanted to hit the restart button because like I was such an outcast in high school. Like I was like, I need to go to a place where people don't know who I am and like build a new life. In like Berkeley,
you wanted to halt and catch fire in sort of technology terms.
Sure, yeah, we'll go with that.
Have you seen that show, Halt and Catch Fire?
It's on the like top of my queue. It's right above Ozark, and it's right below House of Cards, and we're watching House of Cards right now.
There you go. So I love Ozark, by the way. Couldn't get through House of Cards myself, but on I'd never heard of Halt and Catch Fire, so I had to look it up. And then I actually just finished reading Edward Snowden's book, and he actually uses the phrase "halt and catch fire." And I'm like, 51 years. Well, I guess a lot of that doesn't count anyway, but call it the last 25 years. Never heard the phrase "halt and catch fire," and then there's a show, and it's in a book. So
there you go.
Anyway, I thought I'd use it. So you wanted to reboot. I totally get that, by the way. I totally understand that concept. Did it work?
Totally. So I was, like I said, I was really overweight in high school. So I was like 230 pounds when I graduated.
How tall are you?
I am 6 feet. Give or take
6 feet. Okay. And were you give or take 6 feet in high school?
Yeah, probably about the same height.
Okay. 6 feet, 230. You're a big kid.
I was a big kid. Yeah. Unfortunately, in COVID, I put on like the COVID 10 and to start shedding some weight here. But anyway, so I had a fair amount of time because I was a spring admit between getting out of school and going to Berkeley. And so I was like at the gym like 2 hours a day. I did like the Atkins diet. I was like, I'm going to go to Berkeley and I'm like literally going to be a different person. I'm just going to reinvent myself. So I lost like 40 pounds before I went to Berkeley. And then because I was a spring admin, I actually had a really interesting initial experience at Berkeley. They don't guarantee you housing if you're a spring admit, so I couldn't live in the dorms. And I was like, well, great. Like,
oh God,
I'm not a super outgoing person. I was relying on the dorms to like get into the social life of being a college student. What the hell am I going to do? Mm-hmm. But I ended up finding housing at Mills College, which is an all-girls school in Oakland.
Okay.
And their graduate program is co-ed, or at least it was at the time. And so I lived in the graduate dorms for my first 6 months at Berkeley. And I thought that it would be like the dorms would be full. And so I would still have a dorm experience, even though these people were a little bit older than I was. As it turns out, though, there were only like 3 people living in the building while I was there. It was an empty dorm. So it was like a really isolating 6 months. Made some like good friends, but super weird experience. And then I was like, well, I can't go to the dorms now as a sophomore, my second year, but I could do the co-ops. And so I did the co-ops.
Good for you. So I'm gonna skip ahead because you're a foodie, like, and I know that because of your answer to my question about your last meal.
Yeah.
Was Chez Panisse when you were at Berkeley?
Yeah.
Did it have that same just wonderment about it?
Yep. Yeah. I mean, Alice Waters was already, famous for, the new California cuisine and, growing a lot of your own, produce and all that stuff.
Did you get to go as a student?
I did. So my wife took me for our first anniversary. We went to Chez Panisse.
That's when you knew you had picked the right one.
Yeah, this is like our first dating anniversary because we dated for like married.
I love that place so much. Actually, the last time I was there, Alice sat right behind me. She was talking to like 3 or 4 other people. Sat right behind me. I said to my wife, "That's Alice Waters." That's Alice Waters. She's like, "You think you know everybody?" I'm like, "No, I know this person."
You get her signature, like have her sign her cookbook?
No, I didn't ask her to. I don't like to impose on celebrity. They're just living their life, right? They're having a conversation. They don't want to be interrupted. At least I wouldn't want to interrupt them. So out of law school, do you go right from undergrad to law school?
I did. And actually, like I said, so I was not quite good enough to be a regular Berkeley student, right? I was a spring admit. Yeah. That's another chip on my shoulder. Then I applied to Bolt Hall or UC Berkeley School of Law. I don't get in. So I actually went to the University of San Francisco School of Law for my first year. Did really well there. Was at the top of the class, and then transferred back to Berkeley. So twice Berkeley like pseudo rejected me, but I have 2 Berkeley degrees anyway. Take that.
Well, how did you do as an undergrad? Did you do well?
Nah, I was okay. I was a political science major, which means that like I should have had a 4.0 or something, right? It's a relatively easy major to be in. In my first 2 years, I had like a 3.0 somewhere in there. And then my last 2 years, I had like a 4.0 or a 3.9 or something. Like I dramatically changed my focus, but by the time you average the two, it wasn't stellar.
All right. So how do you do in law school at Berkeley?
Law school at Berkeley was fun. I'm like one of the weird people who actually really enjoyed law school, but I hated being a lawyer.
Right. So you go into, no surprise here, you go into law after graduating from law school, and you don't like it. Why?
Yeah, good question. So when I was in law school, I was clerking with a criminal defense firm that handled capital cases. So we had like a couple of really interesting cases there. And like that is super engaging because the stories are all like very tangible and real and human, and there's a lot on the line. And even if your clients are, scumbags, usually the system has dicked them over in hundreds of ways throughout their life, so you can have some compassion and you can kind of see where they are. So that was super engaging. Then I graduate law school. Like I know I'm not going to be a criminal defense attorney. I ended up going to Cooley Godward and falling into a practice group that I had like never heard of or would have thought of, called Fund Formation, where all of the work we do is for venture firms. We help form the funds. We help them, execute their deals. And that was like, I had been reading TechCrunch and Popular Science and Popular Mechanics and sci-fi. I've been into tech, but I really had no idea what venture capital was pre Cooley. At least not how the industry actually operates. Like I had probably heard the name before, but that was it. And then, was exposed to it sort of tangentially doing what I was doing, but just like hated being a lawyer. And I think part of it is because I want to be the principal and not the agent. So I want to be the decision maker. And when you're the lawyer, you're just the person who's helping to smooth things along and execute. I'm being charitable to the lawyers right now, because
you are.
They do a lot of things besides smooth things along and execute. Not the least of which is bill hours. And I would find myself debating with another lawyer about a Series A fundraise, like a term in Series A fundraising docs. And like we would spend half an hour on the phone debating whether or not there should be a knowledge qualifier to a clause, right? A knowledge qualifier is something that like I'm telling you, like I'm promising that there's no toxic waste in my yard. I can promise you there's no toxic waste in my yard, or I can say, to my knowledge, there is no toxic waste in my yard, right? And there are in thousands of places in these standard docs, you can have a material qualifier, which means this is an important thing or it's not an important thing, or a knowledge qualifier, right? But the docs are basically standard. And I know when I'm doing these things that my clients, the venture firms, like the partners of the venture firms, and the companies, the clients of the other lawyer, don't give a shit about the thing we are debating about. And it is never going to come up. And if it does come up, it's not going to matter. And if it matters, it's because the company was like so screwed anyway. It really doesn't matter. But meanwhile, like an hour of lawyer time at $300 or $400 an hour has been burnt doing this. And the incentives of the lawyers is to do that constantly because they bill by the hour, and which means they make money by the hour, and they only have downside risk, right? For the lawyers, like if they miss something, anything, and it does come back to bite you, they get in trouble for that. So there's like zero incentive for them to be like careful with their time. It's a terrible system. I'm not that detail oriented. Like I just want to talk about what matters. And you don't get to do that as a lawyer.
So I had the same. I don't think quite as. I don't know if cynical is the right word here, but I think what you said about being the principal as opposed to the agent, that was my experience as an investment banker in the mid to late 90s, which was. I really loved being around my clients and I loved helping them, but I was jealous as hell. Like I wanted to be the client, not the banker. right? So I totally understand where you're coming from. So how do you make the transition then from lawyer to investor? What happens? How do you get there?
Yeah, well, it's definitely not a direct path. And I knew that when I left Cooley, that like even if I wanted to eventually be a VC, I wasn't going to be able to just apply to Andreessen Horowitz and like come on in as a principal or something, right? So when I left, I actually left to start a business. The first business I left to start, I did not start. So I thought I was going to start it. I left. I did a bunch of work, and then realized that like the numbers just didn't make sense. Like it didn't make sense to pour my life into this thing because I didn't think I was going to actually be able to make it work. Then I took a job where I could like use my law degree in a startup, but I could do things that weren't just being a lawyer, right? I was like, well, I need to build some skill sets that aren't just being a lawyer. So I ended up like running logistics for a startup that was a food company, and they had a pretty complicated supply chain. Most of their goods came from other places in the world, from all over the world. And so I did that for a couple of years, and then left to found a company. And I founded a legal tech firm, which ended up being like a massive failure. So I founded a company that was sort of like, what is that called?
LegalZoom?
Not LegalZoom. Matt Faustman was the CEO, or is the CEO. Anyway, it was a legal tech company that was like, it had like some shared documents, like legal templates, and then like would connect you with a lawyer if you needed a lawyer. And so the point was we would help generate up counsel. So we would help lawyers basically generate leads for their business, and then would also provide them with a bunch of like SaaS tools that they could use to manage their practice. So we were like Up Counsel or Clio or Total Attorney, which are all sort of tech platforms that lawyers can use. But at the end of the day, you're really about trying to connect those lawyers with clients. I think it was a massive failure, A, because I was like inexperienced running a business, and this was like my first rodeo. But B, like our customers were small firms and selling to, like solo practitioners or firms of like 2 or 3 people. It's really, really hard business. I mean, it's a lot of like grinding it out. Most of those folks were not technology forward, pretty risk averse. It was hard. But the month after we decided to shut it down, we made our first revenue, but it was already too late. So,
yeah. So, do you ever kind of rewind that experience? The month after you decide to shut down, you earn revenue. Do you ever think back like maybe we were just in the slog, or did you make the right decision? Do you know?
I mean, I think I made the right decision because my daughter had just been born, and like credit cards were maxed out, no money in my bank account. Like I definitely needed to get a job, or raise money. And given where we were at the time, I don't know if I could have suckered anybody into giving us money.
So that's an interesting expression. Can we dig in there? Suckered anybody into giving us money? You're a VC.
Yeah.
I mean, we got to dig in.
Well,
suckered anybody into giving us money? Come on.
Well, like I said, at the time, the numbers weren't good. Like I would have looked at that business and been like, you haven't shown me that you can build something that works. Like there's no evidence of product market fit. Like you have barely any revenue. Like it's just, you could, I don't want to dive too much into like our co-founding relationship, but it wasn't great. Like there were 100 reasons you would choose not to invest in our business. So that was not a comment on the VC industry as a whole. It was really a comment on the ineptitude of the business, the team running our business and what we had built.
Okay. So then you have to get a job.
You have to get a job.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
and keep going.
No, you go.
I'm just gonna be quiet. I'm asking the progression because we're getting to the investment side of this, which is, you're now a partner in your second venture firm. Tell us about Gelt. how do you start Gelt, and who's your partner there? And
so fast forward a little bit, I ended up working at a company called Saze that is in a lot of ways a holding company, privately held by a couple of guys, really, really great humans. I love working with them. A lot of their subsidiaries are fairly successful, and so they've got good cash flow in the business. And at first I come in and I'm their general counsel and their VP of strategy, which is super amorphous. That title, like, what does that mean? What do you do? What it meant there is I basically meddled in all of the projects, hopefully positively, but I think it depends on how I was meddling, how you viewed my meddling. It's true with everything. But ultimately, I convinced them that we should have a corporate venture program because I wanted to run a venture program, and I think they did too. And so we ended up launching that. It's called Saze Partners. It still runs today. So the founders there are Korean, although they live in the U.S. So today, Saze Partners is very focused on investment in companies in Korea that might want to come to the U.S. or have a U.S. expansion, or companies in the U.S. maybe founded by Koreans or have Asian expansion designs. So that's their thesis today. When I was running it, it was really more a strategic venture program. Didn't have the Korea nexus. It was really about finding companies that we thought either we could help out with some of our subsidiaries or would just be good investments for us.
Right.
So anyway, so to your Gelt question, so I was running this corporate program, and we invested in a company called Demuso, which is a fintech company in the multifamily property space. So they have a bunch of fintech solutions for renters and for landlords running large multifamily property complexes. Doing really well these days. I think they're like processing more than $1 billion in payments, or well over $1 billion in payments now. But anyway, so I invested in that company, and that company was founded by this guy, Damien Langier, who is the cousin of Keith Wasserman, and they run Gelt Inc. together. And Gelt Inc. is a large real estate investment firm down in LA, invests in multifamily properties, which is why they founded Demuso. So anyway, while I'm at Saze, I invest in these guys, meet them, obviously, start building a relationship there, liked working with them. And they decided at some point that they wanted to launch a venture firm or a venture program and offer that to their LPs. And they asked if I would come and run it for them. And I did. I thought it was a great opportunity. I realized that corporate venture, while a great launching pad for my career, wasn't really a great place to build a long-term career in venture. We're investing off the balance sheet. We have a bunch of interests that are not financial, and a lot of reasons why it's hard to build a venture career there. Although I will say, 2 days ago, the largest exit, I believe, in Kansas City history, this company, Backlot Cars, was just acquired for $425 million. That is one of the first investments I made at Saze, and super excited for those guys. Jeff Davis, really, really great person. And so I'm sure this is a life-changing outcome for him. But obviously I'm pretty excited too. So.
Yes. Congrats. That's great news. So, and so you're at Gelt. At what point do you realize maybe Gelt's not the long-term play for you as well?
Yeah. Good question. So I was running Gelt, and I was getting close to the end of the first fund, thinking about what I wanted to do, long term with my career, where I wanted to be, right? And at Gelt, I was running it like a very generic seed firm, not to cast aspersions on what I was doing or any of the investments I made there. I think that fund is going to be extremely successful, but I was really investing in any seed stage business, no sector focus. We had marketing automation and all sorts of stuff that I personally did not find compelling at all. I just thought the business was a good business. And then I was like, what do I actually want to build with my life, right? Do I want to build something big and institutional? And I came to the conclusion that, yes, I did. Like, if I want to have the impact I want to have, I need to have a real firm. It needs to be quite large. I need to have partners that are like helping to run the business with me and really build something, not Andreessen Horowitz or Sequoia, but something in that vein, something institutional that would live on past either me dying or me traveling the stars, right?
Right.
And I came to the realization that I couldn't build that at Gelt. Just the structure there, it was more like a fund being run by a family office is maybe the best way to describe it. And it wasn't going to be a product that I thought would be attractive to institutional investors, or that would let me hire, 3 or 4 or 5 partners over time to come and run it with me. And so, decided that I probably was going to have to move on. That whole decision process, though, I knew that I was going to have to make some tough decisions. And the way I made those decisions is I went on a retreat at Reboot, run by Jerry Colonna, and spent a weekend with a bunch of other VCs, talking about, sort of our why we do what we do and what we want to do with our lives, and, sort of getting in touch with our more essential selves. And over the course of that weekend, I realized I had to leave. I couldn't build what I wanted to build at Gelt. And so it was going to be really stressful to leave because I was going to have to do this on my own, but I thought it was the right decision. And I realized that I needed to stop investing in things that I wasn't interested in. And I should only be investing in companies that are really building a piece of the future I want to live in. And so mostly that means deep tech, but outside of deep tech, I do a little bit in future of work. We've invested in Alto, obviously, because I view that as an extension of future of work, sort of freeing up people to live the lives they want to live and sort of self-actualize, which I'm also very passionate about. And so I made those decisions over the course of that weekend. And then I had the meta realization, which is this one weekend was so powerful and transformative for me. If I were going to build a new venture firm, what I wanted to build was a firm that could provide an element of that to our founders on a regular basis, because it just seemed to me wouldn't that be the most high leverage way I could actually add value to our teams? And so that was that weekend was the seed crystal for what became Alpha Bridge Ventures.
Can you talk? So you just referenced Atlas in terms of, I'm going to describe it as mental wellness for, I'm shorthanding it, but mental wellness for founders, entrepreneurs, other startup executives. How did Atlas come together as part of Alpha Bridge, and how'd you get there?
So it took a long time. So Reboot weekend, made all my decisions, talked with the Gelt guys, let them know that wouldn't be doing a fund 2, but needed to do something a little bit different. Very hard conversation to have. Then started really thinking about what I wanted to build and who I wanted to build with, right? Because I didn't want to be a solo GP anymore. So I had been investing for a while with my friend Howie Diamond, and we had just been sharing deals back and forth. He was a solo GP. I pitched him on the idea of a fund that would be focused on mostly post-seed, which is what we do, and a fund really focused around supporting founders in their mental health and leadership development, coaching, and that kind of stuff. And it was very much in line with the things that he had seen in the market and the things that he wanted to build too. So we decided to try and build it together. So we started having conversations about what this might look like, and realized a few months in that we were just not capable of building this thing ourselves. And so he had met, who is our third partner now, Dr. Carrie Solons, at an event. She has a background in clinical psychology and a focus in organizational design and entrepreneurship. And anyway, so he suggested we bring her in just to do a study for us. So bring her in as a contractor and help us figure out what we should actually build and what it would look like. And she ended up interviewing, I think, maybe a dozen founders, each for like 3 hours, so very long sessions, went really deep, and put together a report for us on all of the common struggles and what she thought a program should look like. When that was done, we were just like, clearly you are the best person to run this for us. I mean, Carrie's really amazing. So we asked her to come join us and like build this thing out that we ultimately called Atlas, or have called Atlas. And so what that looks like from a practical perspective is we have Carrie work with our founders post-investment and try and figure out strengths and weaknesses, and then try and build something custom for all of our founders that really solves their like biggest needs, right? The thesis for us being, there's all this stuff going on in your life besides building a business that's stressful and weighs you down. And if we can take 2 or 3 hours a week off your plate or help alleviate some of that stress, then it really frees you up to think about your business. And if we can do that, then like everybody wins at the end of the day, right? And so, we work with therapists and coachists and one thing we realized, or Carrie realized, or taught us, is that the link between the physical and the mental is a lot closer than most people, I think, intuitively believe. And so a lot of our founders, for instance, have like digestive issues. It's like the mind-body connection, stress drives all sorts of things. And so we work with a lot of founders on that kind of stuff, right? And that makes their lives a little bit better, helps them sleep a little bit better, and hopefully means that they're a little bit more effective day to day.
Well, I'll just go ahead now and plug Carrie as the CEO of a company that has actually brought Carrie in to work with the team, and the benefits that Alto experienced as a result. The other thing that I think is really interesting, and I want to get into kind of your investment criteria at Alpha Bridge, and also, I guess the connection to Howie, how you guys were friends beforehand. But what was interesting is that, and this is the first and only time this has happened, is that as you were assessing Alto as a potential investment, you had Carrie do a call with our leadership team and then provide an assessment back, all very above board, all completely transparent. We knew what she was there for, and we knew what kind of report she was going to create. Has there been an Atlas report that has ever put the kibosh on a potential investment?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, yeah, Carrie does help out on the diligence side, right? So we do have her help with the team analysis. That's really her specialty and where she shines. We have had her come back with reports on companies that have identified clear problems where she says, these people do not get along, they're not going to last. Or the CEO doesn't respect his or her team of direct reports, and there's going to be tension there, right? Or I don't know, any number of things like that. But then she'll say, but we can do X and Y, or this is where I'll focus my time, right? And so usually it's like the team's fine, some weaknesses, this is what we'll do. Sometimes it's like, I have some real concerns. I don't think they're a game stopper, but like there's real work to be done here. Great. We had one time had her uncover some stuff that was going on that was too extreme for us. Like the risk factors were just way too high for us to like dive into that business. But that's one out of, I don't know, 100 companies she's done this with now over the last 2 years. So it's rare, I think, for something to be like a real game stopper, but it's not rare for her to surface a bunch of red flags.
So I want to talk about Howie for a second, and because this is how you started. I would love to know, I would love for everyone to hear and understand what your connection was in advance of deciding to be partners together, because there seems to be some turbulence, I might say, in Silicon Valley today in terms of what our friend Nikhil has kind of termed the solo capitalist, right? And or this trend back towards individuals as a platform themselves, individuals as VC firms themselves. And so what was it about Howie, and what was your relationship? What made you say, this is an individual? We heard the story about Kerry, but what made you say, this is an individual that I want to go into partnership with?
Yeah. I'll answer your question in 1 second. Quick tangent. I think the solo capitalist thing is a total fad. I think most of the solo capitalists will not be solo capitalists 3 years from now. They're all gonna join forces. And I mean, as a founder, I think I would prefer to work personally. I would rather work with a firm than a solo capitalist. But I would like to work with all of the solo capitalists who are out there that I know and that you're probably thinking of. They're all great people. I join forces and work with that firm and have all of their talents.
Well, and I think I think there are certain ones. I think Nikhil will definitely create a firm, probably with some. I think he wants to be partners with people, and I think he will create a firm. Why do you think what do you think happens with the others?
I mean, I think join forces or create firms or do it for a fun cycle.
Is it because of I'm trying to understand what you think the driver is. Is it economics? Is it something else?
I think being a solo GP is hard, right? It's a hard job. And there are jobs that are much harder out there. I don't want to play the violin for myself here.
Yeah.
No, but it's a hard job, and it's hard to do anything by yourself without the support of a team. It can be isolating or alienating. I think that if you are just doing something on your own, there is no temptation or need to build processes into what you're doing. And so I think it makes consistency actually very hard. You can be much more consistent as an organization. I think it's nice to have different perspectives. I mean, diversity is very important these days, right? Well, it's important in general, but it's very salient these days. We're all talking about it. When you are a solo capitalist, you are inherently non-diverse. You might not be a white man, right? And so diverse in the social context, but you only have one opinion and one background that you're drawing from, which is a great segue into Howie, which is my background is, UC Berkeley to law school to being a lawyer in a big firm, right? Like a very traditional kind of a linear thinking, rational background. I guess that would be right brain or left brain. We'll say left brain. I don't remember. Howie's background is he was a musician. He had a 7-figure record deal with Sony, and he toured the world, and he lived the rock star lifestyle. And then he was a creative after that. And he was an agent trainee at, where was he an agent trainee at? One of the big agencies down in LA. And so he came to venture just from a diametrically opposed place from myself. And I really value that in a partner. I want someone who looks at deals completely differently from the way I look at deals. And picks out different problems, and we might not always get along. We might argue about things. But the last thing I wanted was someone with my same background or my same thought process. So working with Howie was really attractive from that perspective. And yeah, we met because we were both solo GPs running very small funds, which basically means you have $0, zero resources for doing anything. And we met initially at a podcast on The Pitch, which I don't know if you're familiar with, but is sort of like a Shark Tank.
I'm not.
Esque podcast. They're a Gimlet podcast now.
Okay.
And we met as judges on that podcast, and then sort of hit it off and decided to host an event together. So we hosted a dinner for a bunch of founders and friends to split the cost, right? Because we have no money. And then I think we hosted another couple events. We ended up being on a full season of the Pitch podcast, and like hung out a bunch doing that. Started trading deals, and so like it was like a very organic kind of relationship.
I think what's similar, if I could be so bold as to insert my own opinion here, what I think is very overlapping between the two of you, albeit from, I think, very different perspectives, as you pointed out. You both dig in and go deep, and as deep as any investor I think I've met over the last several years. And I think you both do it in an incredibly honest, transparent, and thoughtful way. And I'm not saying that's unique to you guys, but it's not everywhere. And so I think you did find a great partner. And I think Carrie is a great compliment to both of you as well, especially when you think about, hey, how is this firm going to do something for me, the entrepreneur in my company, beyond money, right? And I think the way the three of you think and the value that you can add as a partner is tremendous. So kudos to you all for figuring that out. So
appreciate it. Thank you.
Alpha Bridge, you're welcome. So Alpha Bridge is you, Howie, and Carrie. Where's the name come from?
That's a good question. I keep saying it's a good question. It's a verbal tick, but it actually is a good question. So the name Alpha Bridge, so we do post-seed pre-series A. That's like our focus. The name Alpha Bridge is supposed to be like Alpha A, so bridge to A, right? I really wanted bridge in the name because I wanted to be able to like brand the firm as the firm that does these post-seed pre-series A rounds. We realized, and then we named the program that we run Atlas. In retrospect, those were terrible decisions. One, because Alpha Bridge has meaning to us, but is like the most generic sounding financial firm name to outsiders, right? Because it has alpha in the name, super common. The name Alpha, and it has bridge in the name, which is also super common. Like 10% of venture funds have a bridge in the name, and 10% of venture funds have a lake or a river in the name, and 10% of venture funds have a mountain in the name, and 10% of venture funds have a tree in the name. So like half of venture funds have one of those features in the name, or they mix and match the features, right? Terrible idea. Then the thing that we do that is actually pretty unique in that like we care the most about is the Atlas program, right? It's what we can offer to founders outside of just money, because our money is no different than anybody else's money. In fact, our money is maybe worse than a lot of other firms because we're a small firm. So it's harder for us to like backstop a company that needs help. So we need something else, and that thing is Atlas. So why did we call the thing something different than the firm, right? Terrible idea. Which is all to say that we have been engaged in the world's longest rebrand process, and it has been excruciating. But when we raise our next fund, it will not be Alpha Bridge, and Atlas will not be Atlas. It will be a new name, which we have, but I'm not going to share here yet. And it will be a combined thing, and it fits our demeanor a lot better. Anyway, founders, think hard about your name. Don't think about what appeals to you in the moment. Think about what your audience will think about when they hear your name. That was my mistake.
So this is a really, I cannot agree with you more, by the way. And I thought the difference between Alpha Bridge and Atlas was infinitely confusing. So very glad to hear that you're making a change, and I'm sure you'll find the right name this time. And in fact, I'm highly confident of it. But, you know, it's interesting that you talk about founders choosing names, because Alto was not the original name for what is now Alto. It had a different name. And what was hard for me was the fact that when I told people the name, they never forgot it. They always remembered it. But the first design firm that we were working with, who wanted to create the website, sort of came to us sheepishly one day and said, "So, are you married to this name?" And I said, "No, but I'm not going to pay you for a new one." And they said, "It's okay, we'll do it for free." So they came up with Alto, which I'm also glad to have done. But I'm with you on names. So what does Alpha Bridge invest in, and what's that decision making process
Sure.
like?
So we invest in, as I've said a couple of times now, post-seed, pre-A is like our real sweet spot. We'll do a little bit in seed or pre-seed, but if we go that early, the check size is very, very small. And it's really all about getting to know the company and the team and being there for the next round. In terms of sector, we often say we're sector agnostic, but really it's a lie. Howie does a lot on the consumer side, and consumer physical goods. So we have a lot of like CPG stuff, a lot of direct consumer companies, a little bit of consumer internet. And I do most of my investing in deep. So like aerospace, robotics, AI, a tiny bit of biotech. We've started getting into that. A lot of our stuff have national security applications, for instance. And so that's the side I'm most interested in and passionate about. And then I have like this like sub grouping in like future of work, which is where I would lump Alto in with that. And when I think of future of work, I'm not thinking like productivity tools. I'm thinking about like retraining and how do you give people like the jobs of tomorrow? How do you help bring people into like careers that give them like a sense of dignity and like fulfillment, right? Like that side of the equation.
So for a while you dealt poker for a living. What's the overlap between kind of the poker table and what you do now for a living?
I don't want to.
By the way, you can say it's a good question.
No, I'm not going to. Did you hear me say ugh? I make that noise because I could probably come up with a bunch of like tortured analogies. Like I could write a whole blog post that makes it seem like I think there's a connection just because it would be interesting. But I won't. I think that I was a poker dealer, not a player, although I played plenty, but I would not call myself a professional player by any stretch of the imagination. And dealing poker is also a very tough job. I mean, you're elbow to elbow with your customers all day long. Most of them are losing money, and so they're unhappy. They take it out on the dealer. A lot of them are superstitious, not all, but there are poker players who are professionals and there are poker players who are gamblers. Most of the people at the table are gamblers, so they're superstitious. They take it out on the dealer. I don't know. It's not a great career. But when you're a college student, the tips are great, and it's kind of fun to be a poker dealer or be in a card room all the time.
Heck yeah. So how do you? There's something called power law, right? And people like to apply the power law to seed investing, which in a nutshell kind of says, look, you may think you know the winners, but you don't know the winners. And so what you really need to do is just invest in a large portfolio and invest in almost everything you see at the seed stage. What do you say to that?
Yeah, I think that this is the debate between like spray and pray versus like highly concentrated portfolio. And I think that Jerry Newman has a great analysis of this. And his analysis is basically you'll do better on average the larger the portfolio you can construct. If you assume that you can add zero value to the companies and you're just money, and if you assume that you can get into all the deals you want to get into, and it takes there are a bunch of assumptions that come into play as to whether or not you can do this at scale. I think that you can add value to the companies you invest in. I think that the mathematical analysis is very good, but if I were an LP, I would say I can have exposure to 1,000 portfolio companies. I'm going to do that by investing in 100 GPs who are each investing in 10 companies that they care deeply about. One GP who's investing in 1,000 companies where they cared nothing about any individual company, right? And so I'm looking at this as I have two customers. I'm trying to serve our founder and trying to make their lives better, help them build a more successful business. I'm also trying to serve the interests of our LPs. And so if I'm building a product, because that's what VC is, we're all products in one form or another, I think you need to have a somewhat concentrated portfolio to make a compelling pitch to a sophisticated LP, because they can get all the diversity they need by investing in multiple fund managers. So that's how I view it.
Most people have no idea just how hard it is to raise a fund. What's harder, raising money for an operating company or raising a fund? First time funds.
Maybe it's actually getting easier these days for a first-time fund with angel lists, rolling funds, and those sorts of things. But raising money for a fund, hands down, way harder. First-time fund. Once you have a track record that says that you can, 5x a fund that you've raised, easier. But yeah, when you are raising money for a company, you have built something. And so you're either selling a dream, like you've identified a real problem, you have a product you're going to build, you're raising in pre-seed, there's a ton of potential, you're selling a dream. You're not just, if you're raising at the Series A stage or even Series C, like you might be doing $50,000 a month in recurring revenue or something. And so you're selling that, right? You're selling a product to someone. When you are selling a first-time venture fund, you are selling nothing but yourself. And so you have to convince people that like you will be a good steward of their capital in a market that is notoriously hard to do well in. I mean, only the top, they say top quartile, but really it's like only like the top decile of venture firms like really do very well. Top quartile will be a decent return on your money. Top third of firms, not so much, like especially once you consider that you're locking your money up for 10 plus years. So it is hard. It is hard to raise a first-time fund.
So, I mean, you have to be just as determined, if not more determined, than any of the founders that you work with to be able to do that. And, I think that's actually a huge benefit as a founder of working with a new fund, because you understand the ups and downs and the trials and tribulations and any other cliches that I can come up with, in terms of roller coaster ride.
I mean, I've had
and what it takes.
I've had the people commit money to our fund before, and then come back 3 months later before closing and say, oh, you know what, I just remodeled my kitchen, and so now I can't commit to your fund, right? Like that stuff happens to me, and it happens to our founders. Like we know.
Yeah. So you mentioned AngelList and rolling funds, and I think AngelList and Avlock have hit the nail on the head with this thing. Is it the future of early stage venture capital, you think?
I don't know. That's a really good question. And see, they're good question. But this is actually a really good question, and I have no idea what the answer is. I've been thinking about it a lot. I think part of the answer is, or part of the way to think about the question is, how important is it to have institutional LP capital for this to become the future? And I don't know if it is or not. If it is, then I think, no, it doesn't become the future. I think there are lots of reasons why institutional funds won't invest in rolling funds. Like it's just not in their interest to. But these rolling funds open the asset class up to a much broader investor base, right? So it's any accredited investor, which is true for most funds too. But with rolling funds, you can generally solicit, right? So you can actually publicize what you're doing, which makes it much easier for accredited investors to find the funds. I think that new investor base might be large enough to support a whole new class of investors, and you might not need institutional investors to come in. And then I think the question is, what does it look like if you double or triple the number of people who are playing in the pre-seed and seed game? Seed is already super crowded. Like, the prices are very, very high, especially Bay Area and New York. I think the answer is the only way that's sustainable, the only way those people make money, the only way I make money is if we encourage more entrepreneurs to build more companies. Like, there's this supply and demand tension, right? Then we can go down the whole immigration rabbit hole and the terrible policies of we need more immigrant founders and blah 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 blah. But yeah, I think rolling funds are probably going to be here to stay. I think it's going to make seed really, really. I think it's going to make it much harder to stand out as an investor. But
so this is the last topic, and I think you actually opened the door to this, and then I'll let you go. So we're in the middle, not even, maybe we're in the middle. I don't know if we're in the early stage, the middle, or the end of this pandemic, right? But what I have seen and have evidence of, at least on Twitter VC, right, is the fact that people are leaving cities. I think you've seen it in the Bay Area. We're seeing it in New York. And that includes people who are going to be entrepreneurs. So do you think COVID will shift where dollars get invested and alter the pre-seed and seed landscape as a result?
Yeah. So we invest anywhere in North America, is what we say. We don't have any companies in Mexico yet. We have 3 in Canada. And then the rest in the U.S. are spread out all over the U.S. Now, the single largest geography for our companies is the Bay Area, but we have companies in Tennessee, for instance, where Alto is based.
Mm-hmm.
And
good place. Nashville.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It seems like Nashville's probably attracting a lot of folks out of the Bay Area right now, would be my guess.
It is.
We have investments in Chicago and New York and LA. So I mean, they're major metros, but not just the Bay Area. And I'm sure I'm forgetting a couple other regions too. I'm sure we have an investment in Texas. We've got an investment in Maryland, DC. So we're pretty geographically split up. But still half the companies I see are Bay Area based companies. And I'd say 70% or 80% of the companies we see are either Bay Area, New York, or LA. I don't think that's going to be the case a year from now or 2 years from now. We've learned that it's actually very easy to work remote. A lot of our portfolio CEOs have said, we're never going back to the office space we had in San Francisco. We don't need it, right? We're going to save that money and use it for other things. So I think that there will be a dispersion of talent. I don't know what all the implications of that are. 10 years ago, if there had been a dispersion of talent, I would have said, well, it's really going to hamstring the innovation economy, because I think there's a lot of value in serendipity and being in the same place. I still think that's true, but it's less true today than it was 10 years ago. So
I think that last part that you just said, that is less true today than it was 10 years ago, is 100% true. I cannot agree with it more. We have technologies, we have powers, superpowers today that we didn't have 10 years ago. But I will say this, and maybe it's an outlier opinion. I can't wait to get back to the office. I can't wait to have my team back in one place because of the serendipity that you mentioned, because of the way things can just organically evolve. Conversations, camaraderie, high fives, whatever you call it. There are some things, and our team has found this because we've had smaller groups get together outdoors when we've had problems that we just weren't solving via Zoom. And so we get together, and we bring an easel and a pad of paper and and we solve the problem, right? And we don't leave until the problem is solved. And I think that happens in person much better than it happens by camera. And so I, for one, am really looking forward to having all these Slack conversations take place in real life.
Yeah.
Even though at Alto we have bought the URL slackoutloud.com, because if you look at some of our Slack conversations, they're just so goddamn funny. We think that every company is probably having some version of the same, and so we're gonna post up slackoutloud.com and get people to contribute, give everybody a little bit of humor.
It's a great idea.
So, Jake, thank you for being on the show and for spending an hour with us. I cannot thank you enough. I love that we met 3 years ago at that Reboot conference where you went whole hog on being a VC, and I ran away and said, I'm going back to do the company thing. Yeah. It was just delightful. Thank you for being
Thanks for having me. This has been great. We should do it again.
The Altogether Show is brought to you by Alto IRA. Alto knows that the public markets offer insufficient diversification of retirement accounts. That's why Alto developed a streamlined platform to make it easy and cost-effective for anyone to invest their tax-advantaged retirement savings in alternatives. Assets like real estate, VC, and crypto that are outside of the public markets and available through Alto's 21 platform partners. To learn more, visit altoira.com.